Good evening, Ruben Marquez. I am going to talk about my interview for this final project. The first question I want to tackle is share why you selected the person to be your interviewee. I have to admit that the person I did interview was not my first choice. I actually had something planned out and it fell through. It's been a very busy season for me. All last week I was tending to a family and whose mother was passing away. She ended up passing away Wednesday, and we held her funeral Saturday morning, which is very interesting with all the restrictions they have with this COVID-19 going around. But we managed to make it through, hold a reception and a very good service. I did not officiate, although we were the host church, but I did put together the program. And my superintendent from Tahlequah, Oklahoma, came down because he had officiated the husband about 8 years ago who passed away. So it was good to see him and to get a little counsel while he was here. Um, so I had sent my questions to a friend of mine because I knew I was short on time, and she actually runs the recovery programs in Crossings Community Church here in Oklahoma City. She's a family friend. Her parents actually go to my church, so it's kind of a coincidence. Longtime members of my church, and so she's now working all the ministries down there, working even in the hospital that Crossings has, and tending to even the mental health of patients. And she's a pretty awesome woman, and I was looking forward to seeing her responses because it wasn't going to be a face-to-face, a verbal interview. Well, she fell through. She has a lot going on right now with breast cancer here recently. I think she's recovering from that. Going down to Houston for some treatments. So we've been praying for her. But also with her dad. Her dad took a fall. He's in a nursing home, and he's about 94 years old. And so just tending to her family and just with her job and everything is real demanding. So pray for Teresa Payton if you get a chance. My second pick, though, my go-to was my dad. I didn't want to make him feel like he was anything less than number two, but because he's really number one in my life. He raised me. He taught me everything that I know. Him and my tata, his dad, and I'll kind of explain as I analyze some of his responses and give you some insight and feedback. But my dad, he pastors a church about 30 miles east of here, of Oklahoma City, and he's just an awesome, genuine person, and his testimony goes out not only in the church but even at the workplace. He works at Tinker Air Force Base with me, another organization. He's a work lead on the floor, but anybody that hears my name, because his name is Ruben Marquez as well. He's senior, I'm junior. Actually, I'm number two. But every time someone hears my name and gets us confused, they have nothing but good things to say about him, and it really shows in his interview. It really solidified it. So that's the reason why I picked him. But the second, explain which of the five practices you personally see modeled by the interviewee. So of the five, it killed me at first because I couldn't say it, but I personally see model the way so strong in his life, and I'm gonna read a little excerpt, a little quote from Christian Reflections on Leadership, or the Leadership Challenge by Kuzis and Posner, on page 12 here. It says the most powerful thing a leader can do to mobilize others is to set the example by aligning personal actions with shared values. Leaders are measured by consistency of their deeds and words, by walking the talk. And that's my dad. That's totally my dad. He like I said, his testimony, it follows him everywhere he goes. It's just something that he lives by, his strong convictions, his integrity, and I think that most of his success in ministry, if we can gauge that, came from the way he modeled. And so I asked him. I said, "Well, what is your strongest? What do you think is your strongest?" And of course, model the way, and also he thought that inspire. what was the second one? He thought that his second strongest might be enable others to act. Um, the reason why he thought that his second was enable others to act is because out of his church, he has developed, I think, 3 or 4 licensed ministers, and 2 of them are pastoring in other churches around Oklahoma to this day, in Claremore, around Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Muskogee. And so he's kind of gone that route, and we all studied together beforehand. I should say 3, because now I'm in Dale City, Oklahoma, or Midwest City, and I'm pastoring a church as well for the past 6 years. So I would have to say, and I guess the next one is discuss if your views match the views of the interviewee, why or why not, and be specific. I would have to say I agree. I think they match very well. It took me to page 43 here. It says, as a leader, it's imperative that you lead yourself before you lead others. This is a simple but profound truth, and often we learn it the hard way. Before we try to straighten others out, we must straighten ourselves out. And like I said before, my dad, I got to see a side of him that not a lot of people got to see or even get to see. He like I said, his testimony follows him everywhere he goes. But man, when he married my mom, and growing up in California, I remember a very angry person. He had some anger problems, and I would always say it ran in the family on the Marquez side. My little brothers kind of inherited it as well. And you add drugs to the mix, and one of my brothers turned out in a really bad spot for a while. But for my dad, I got to see him grow, and so one thing I think of, and when I think of integrity and such, is just the way he raised me, and I try to model the same thing, especially with my kids, because that anger, I feel it even got passed down to me in some way as well, and whether it's because I'm a guy or whatever it is, I blame it on the Marquez side. But my dad, he would discipline us, and sometimes he would get very angry, and he would either spank us or do his disciplining. But what sticks out to me the most about him was that evening, the evening that I would be disciplined, and probably rather harshly. Um, he would always come to my room at night and wake me up, and he'd be kneeling at my bed, and he would you can feel the remorse and even the repentance in his voice, whether he was crying or not, and he would always apologize. He would always apologize. And it's not that he was apologizing for disciplining us. It was just that he let his anger, I guess, outweigh the actual teaching moment. And it's just something that I find very, very respectable, because I was, and I remember it young, when I was probably 5, years old. But it is something that sticks out to me. That's the kind of guy he is, and so now you see him and you wouldn't think he gets worked up about anything. Although, like I said, he has high blood pressure, and that makes him a candidate for that COVID-19. So needless to say, the Department of Defense has given him up to 60 days off administrative leave. Must be nice. But my dad, he's pretty awesome, and it reminded me of something I read in the book as well, in the textbook, on page 90. Kuzis and Posner, it says, it takes a lot of courage to admit you're wrong, to admit mistakes, and to accept someone else's idea over your own. But I honestly think that as a leader, if you're not apologizing on a regular basis, you're probably not leading well. And so even to this day, and it might change, and that's in the chapter, enable others to act, which happens to be his second pick in his words. Even to this day, we have conversations about church and different insights, and he is not afraid to say he's wrong. Sometimes he won't say it at the moment, or even to consider another view, but he'll stay quiet. And he always comes around, though. My dad, he's something else. The next one is provide insights you have gained from your interview. I think one of the big things is when I asked him about what he thought of me, and what he said was, Well, he saw the same things, but he thought that his number two was my number one, enable others to act. Um, and so he says because it's just something he saw in me when I started the ministry and youth, and then went to the church, how people gravitated towards me. He kind of felt like we had those same two attributes, which well, I'll explain the difference as we go on to the last point that I want to cover. And then the other one, explain how the responses of the interviewee aligned or did not align with the course material. The responses aligned very well, actually. He was on point when I gave him the five practices and explained them in my own words what I've learned. He caught on right away. And he said he started thinking about other leaders that he knows. He says, when I think of Inspire Vision, I think of Pastor so-and-so. And when I think of this, I think of so-and-so. So his responses, they were right on point. And he reminded me that we should even try to strengthen the ones that we are not good at. And another quote from the book by Cruzes and Posner on page 126 about leaders keeping hope alive, which happens to be one of my weakest, and even him in a way. It says they keep hope alive by demonstrating the courage of their convictions. And so though he might not think it is his strong point, my dad has kept hope alive because of the demonstration he's given us by his deep convictions that he has lived by, and it's a courage that not a lot of people are willing to keep, especially in this day and age. And so I found our interview very very enlightening. It says, since you've had 5 weeks to explore more deeply into the 5 leadership practices, discuss which leadership practice you see as your top practice, and do your thoughts align with the assessment taken in week 1? So yeah, when I first started this course, I thought model the way would be my thing, and even enable others to act, like my dad said. And when we started breaking it up by week, I noticed that challenge the process happened to be one of my passions, and I think one of my strong points. To give you 2 examples, at work and in my current position, the organization I'm affiliated with, we are known by the upper organizations that oversee the complex there at the Air Logistics Center. We are known to be the fighters, not in a bad way, but that we don't just bow down to policy. As a matter of fact, my leadership tells me, just because it's regulation or policy does not mean we have to be policy constrained. And so if there's a better way, policy can be changed, and even the regs can. If there's a better way, the warfighter, that's our mission. And so I live it at work, and even in my church. I've never been paid as a pastor. It was always voluntary, and I felt that if people saw that I was volunteering, that they'd be more apt to volunteer. And I don't know if that really played out well. Either way, I've always questioned our process with church. Do we have to do what we do? Why do we do what we do? What is a first century church? How does that look in our day and age? Well, now look at us. We can't even gather more than 10, it seems like. And the funeral this last weekend was insane. But I think it's driving the church to something different, something else. And I'm actually very excited to see what comes out of this. Because just because we can't gather all together and do the program we're so used to doesn't mean that our fellowship can't be rich and deep. Doesn't mean that God's not going to be there with us. And so challenge the process. I'm huge on that. And what's funny is that, yes, in week 1, that was my highest at 26. My second was model the way and inspire. Actually, my second was enable others to act. And then my third was model the way and inspire shared vision. And so it's interesting because I kind of fought it. I'm like, no, it's got to be model the way. No, it really is challenge the process. I've enjoyed this class, and I really thank you for everything you've done, everything you do. And I pray God's blessings over you and your family and your ministry as well. Bye.